So, welcome everyone for our Shop Talk with Apex. Today, we're going to have a talk about the challenges of processing email. So, again, welcome to all of you for joining us. We're going to have the presentation. We have a space for question and answers and then announcements, but Steve has assured me that if you have questions during his presentation, he's more than happy to welcome them either as a question in chat or raise your hand and we can unmute you and let you ask your question that way. So let's give Steve control here. And there you go, Steve. Please take it away.
Okay, well, thank you, Lisa. I think looking at the list of attendees, I think I know several of you, and you know me. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Steve Frizzell, and I'm with APPX Software, and we're located in Jacksonville, Florida. We have been COSA sponsor now for, gosh, at least 10 years, I think. And we're happy to be able to do a shop talk every year and have an opportunity to provide you with some information that might be useful. So today we're going to talk about the challenges of processing emails. A little over 2 years ago, we began developing a system that could be used for processing large volumes of emails, specifically with the state archives in mind. So during the last 2 years, we've had to overcome a lot of issues and a lot of challenges during the development of that system. So I thought it might be interesting to share some of those challenges with you today, just as information, so that if you're thinking about getting into the processing of emails, or maybe already are, maybe this will be useful information for you to have. I think we've got one slide too many. So the biggest problem that we have to overcome is the volume of emails. There's just so many of them that it's impossible to manually review and process the number of emails that are being created today. Emails over the last 25 years have really become the primary method of corresponding, not only in state government, but in businesses all around the world. And because of that, what we find now is that they have also become a significant source of permanent records that need to be preserved. And so it used to be that you would focus on written correspondence between state agencies, and now more than ever, that same correspondence is taking place, but it's taking place as emails. So besides that, the emails have also become a focus of open records request. So you find newspaper journalists and other people who are doing research asking for access to these emails. And we can't just give access to them without first processing them and making sure that we're not disclosing information that shouldn't be disclosed. So during the last 25 years, most of you have accumulated a backlog of emails. In many cases, you've been receiving PST files or inbox files or zip files full of emails, and not having any way to really process them. You've probably just been stashing them away somewhere on a disk drive, waiting for the day that you could begin to do something with them. So there's a huge backlog of emails in most cases that state archives have that are waiting to be appraised, processed, published for public consumption, and possibly preserved for long-term preservation. Millions more are being created every year, so there's no end in sight. I suppose someday we may find a better way to communicate than emails, but right now it looks like emails are here for a long time to come. So the question is, how can a state archive really meet that challenge of processing that huge volume of emails that you already have in a backlog, as well as the volume of emails that are continuing to be created every day? jump two on me again. All right. So the first challenge is getting a handle on what you have. Okay, so you've got disk drives full of emails, and maybe you have an index you've been maintaining somewhere of whose emails they are. But one of the things we can do is we can create an electronic email archive for these emails. And so if we create an archive, what we're really doing is we're ingesting them into the system, and we're creating an inventory, an online inventory of all the emails that you have. We're not necessarily processing them for preservation or for public access, but we're ingesting them in. And what it does is it gives the archive staff access to those emails, searchable emails, so that if you do have a request, you can use the search capabilities within the archive to find the emails that are of interest and respond to request. By also having them online and in a searchable, browsable format, then you can begin to appraise them and decide, is there anything here of value that needs to be preserved? Or maybe the only value is we want to make them available for public consumption. Either way, by having them online and being able to review them and browse them, you have the opportunity to make those kinds of decisions. So when we set up an archive, we decided to make it a three-level hierarchy. The first level is what we call the archive level, and it corresponds to an entity. Now, normally an entity is a person. So one person can have emails, but an entity could also be a pseudo person, if you want to call it that, a person, not really a person, but maybe an email address that you tell people to send emails to, like history@archives. And so you have lots of emails coming into that email address. Doesn't belong to a person per se, maybe it belongs to an organization. And that can also be an archive for emails like that. Each archive can have one or more accounts. It's not uncommon for state officials to have more than one email account, perhaps for different purposes. And then each email account at the third level can have what we call packages of emails. So these can be groups of emails that are contributed over time, or maybe in different batches that you receive. I mentioned an email archive has to be searchable, and ideally you would want it to be searchable by keywords and phrases and by email addresses based on who they're from, who they're to, who was copied, even who was blind copied. It would also be convenient to have facets that you can use to filter those emails down into groups and subgroups. Filters maybe by folder or by year and month, or type of attachments that are on the emails, or any other attributes of those emails. And I mentioned that the search program needs to let you browse emails so that you can look at similar emails one after the other and review them. So while you're browsing them, you also may need the capability to print them. Maybe you need to print a copy of an email to provide to someone. You also need to be able to view the attachments and decide whether the attachments should be provided to someone or not. Another nice capability would be when you see an email that you're interested in, you could ask the system to show you other emails that are similar to that one. So if you're looking for emails that are related to a particular topic, the list of similar emails may very well provide you with other related emails, like the one you're looking at. And then finally, of course, an email can be in a thread. And so if you find that email is in a thread, you'd like to be able to see all the emails in the thread and look at them one after another. So what kind of challenges do we run into trying to create an archive? Well, the first challenge is just uploading them to the server. Most of you don't have access to a server where you can just copy a file to the server. So we had to provide a mechanism in the system to allow you to drag and drop emails and upload them to the server automatically. So we had to overcome that challenge. The other challenge is that the emails are received in a variety of formats. They can be PST files, they can be inbox files, individual emails in folders, could be zip files containing emails, or zip files containing inboxes and emails. all kinds of combinations of media can show up with emails. And so the system has to be able to decipher all of those. We have to be able to decompress zip files or GZ files. We have to be able to unzip the contents from a zip file or from a tar file or from an inbox file, or in the case of a PST file, we have to be able to extract the emails from the data in that file. Emails have to also be checked for viruses. We can't just let you start opening up emails without checking to make sure that they're safe. And so we had to check for viruses. We also needed to calculate a checksum on the emails so that we know they don't change over time. So if they're on our system for several years, we want to make sure that they don't become corrupted or damaged or otherwise changed from the original email. So in order to make them searchable, they have to be parsed. We have to extract the information from them. We have to extract the content of the email, and we have to decode it because it can be encoded in different encodings. So we have to then index it for searching. We have to extract the headers and create metadata from the headers and make all that information searchable. And the attachments have to be extracted, decoded, and indexed to be searchable as well. Of course, once you've got attachments, then you have to worry about the viruses that might be in the attachments. So you have to check them for viruses. And then we have to also calculate checksums on the attachments so that we can be sure that the attachments don't change over time as well. So parsing emails is also a bit of a challenge because the standard for emails has changed dramatically over time. This slide shows you that starting in 1977, they defined the first standard for messages on what was called the ARPA network back then. Then in 82, they revised it. In 2001, they revised it again. 2008, it got revised again. And of course, they had to keep revising it because originally emails were text only. But today, emails can be HTML, they can have attachments, they can have all kinds of things in them. And so the standard for emails had to evolve over time to keep up with the technology that changed over time. And so that presents a challenge because some of the emails that we process are 20 or 25 years old. So they were created under one standard that's very different than the standard today. And so the system has to be able to handle the different standards that emails may have been created under. So one of the challenges of parsing is a PST file. PST files are difficult. They're created by Outlook on your desktop, and of course Outlook uses Microsoft Exchange, and so Microsoft Exchange stores emails in a database called the EDB database. And so when you enter an email that's stored on Microsoft Exchange server, it's not stored as an email, it's stored as data in a database. If you store it on your desktop using Outlook, it's stored in a PST file. The PST file is also a type of a database. And so the email isn't really stored in an email format there either. It's stored as data in the PST file. In fact, PST files can contain not just the content of the email, but they can contain contact information, calendar events, notes, journal entries, other types of information. So PST file is really a general purpose database for communicating. So it's much more than just a way to store emails. In the PST format, like the email format has changed over time. PSTs in 2003 were changed. They were changed again in 2010. And so when we try to extract emails from a PST file, we have to take into account the fact that the age of the PST file might require different formatting in order to parse the emails. And then finally, PST files, because they live on your desktop, are subject to corruption. If your desktop computer crashes or the power goes off and you're right in the middle of saving an email, you could have a damaged PST file and you may not be able to retrieve your emails from it at all. And in fact, it's not unusual for a PST file that's submitted to an archive to be corrupt and to have some damage. that makes it a challenge to extract emails from that file. Inbox files aren't quite as much of a challenge as PST files, but they can be a challenge as well, because there's actually 4 different formats of inbox files. And so if you're going to extract the emails from an inbox file, you have to be able to handle all 4 of those formats. And but the inbox file does have the advantage that emails are actually stored in the inbox file in EML format or in email format. And so an inbox file is very convenient, and what you get out of it is the email as it was originally stored in the email format, in the EML format. So even though Exchange Server doesn't use it, or Outlook doesn't use inboxes, Gmail does, and Gmail is a very common type of mail service. And so when you get an inbox file from Gmail, it does contain EML files packed inside of it, which is real convenient for extracting the emails. You can see that a number of other popular email programs also use Gmail. One we use in our office is Thunderbird. It uses inbox files. Some of the other challenges that you run into trying to create an archive and parse the emails is that the file extension isn't always reliable. We had a batch of emails we tried to process that had the .eml extension, which would lead you to believe that they contained an email. In fact, they didn't contain an email. They contained some type of a text message that had been stored in a file and called an email. And so it was a totally different file format than the extension indicated. Individual files can also be corrupt. So individual EML files and zip files, any file that you receive has the potential to be corrupt if it was maybe if some event happened while it was being created. And as I mentioned earlier, files can contain viruses. So every file we receive, we have to virus check. One of the big surprises we ran into is that EML files aren't always compliant with the standard. So even though we have a standard that evolved over 25 years, actually almost 50 years from 1977, those emails don't always follow any of the standard. They follow it 99%, but it's that 1% that doesn't follow the standard that gives you all the trouble. And for example, Outlook decided that they were going to separate email addresses with semicolons instead of commas. The standard calls for a comma to separate email addresses. Outlook also, early in the 2000s, introduced the ability to compose an email in RTF format, so that you can have nicely formatted emails. And that's nice, except that the standard doesn't support RTF as a format for the content of an email. And so when you extract an email from a PST file that has RTF content in the body, there's no way you can accurately represent it in the EML format, because the EML format doesn't directly support RTF content. And so that is a challenge that has to be overcome. And then there are quite a number of other variations that we ran into as well. One of the problems that we run into fairly often is that if a program generates an email, for example, our Axiom system sends out emails, we create those emails in Axiom. And so it's up to us to make sure that we create an email that's properly formatted so that email programs can decipher it correctly. And so a lot of programs that create emails don't necessarily follow the standard to the letter either. So the first step is to create the archive so that you know what you have. So you have a good handle on all the emails that you've got in your inventory. And once you know that, then you can start to put together collections that you want to process. So a collection is a group of related emails that you want to process for some reason, whether it's for preservation or for public access. So in the simplest form, a collection could represent the email for a single person. For example, the governor. You can have all the emails for the governor and call it the governor's collection or something like that. Or as my friend Derek in Kentucky told me, he says, we need to be able to have collections that represent a position in state government, not the person, but the position. And the example he used was that they had a Secretary of State, a 4-year term, and it was split by 2 different people, one person in the first couple of years, and a different person in the other 2 years. And so they wanted to create a collection that represented all the emails for that position for the 4-year period. And so we had to make sure that we could allow for emails from 2 different people and for a restricted period of time, because we only want the emails from that person for the period of time that they were actually serving in that office. So a collection can also, though, be a group of people like the governor and his immediate staff. I think Virginia, when they were processing their emails, had the governor and 15 or 16, 17 other people that were on his staff that they were processing emails as a group for. Or another example would be a board, some kind of a commission or a board that has a half a dozen members, and you want to create a collection of all the emails from the members of that board during the period of time that the board existed. So being able to create a collection from your archives is an important part of being able to process these emails. As I mentioned earlier, the reason that you're going to process them is primarily, there's two primary reasons. One is you're going to make them available for public access, and the other is that you want to identify which emails need to be preserved and then export them for preservation. All right, so I just mentioned this slide. I got a little ahead of myself, so I'll move on. So one of the things we had to wrestle with was the definition of an original email versus a preservation copy of an email. And I guess the general definition is that the original email refers to the complete unaltered email as it was originally sent or received. And so the person sending it has created an original document, and the person receiving it is also creating an original document in that sense. And the email consists of the 3 main components, and that is the content, the metadata, which are the headers from the email, such as the subject and who it's from or to, and the date, and so forth, and then the attachments that go with them. So the de facto standard for representing an email for preservation purposes is the EML file. There are some people who advocate for storing it as a PDF, and that's another format that some people use for preservation purposes. Although I'm not quite sure how they represent the attachments in the PDF. But there is a project underway right now, I think, in Illinois, where they're trying to design a PDF format specifically for the preservation of emails that would include, I believe, include the attachments as part of what's stored in the PDF itself. So it'll be interesting to see if they, when that's available, and they'd be another viable way of preserving emails. But of course, not all emails are stored or sent or received in EML format. I mentioned earlier the PST file. The problem there is what's the original document? You've got a PST file that has 50,000 emails stored as data inside, not stored as emails, but stored as data. And they send you the PST file. And so now you've got to create EML files from that data. Okay, so we convert the contents of the PST file to EML files. And so the question then is the EML file now the original document? Or is the PST file really the original source document that you need to preserve along with the EML files? So we've decided that we can't answer that question, so we'll let you do both or either. So if you want to keep the original PST file and preserve it, you can, along with all the EML files that we extract from it. But I think that the key point here is that an EML file has to contain an accurate representation of an email. So no matter what the source that you use to create that EML file, you need to be able to be certain that that it's a good, accurate representation, not only of the content, but the headers and the attachments. And that's a problem because there's a lot of different programs out there that can extract emails from a PST file. And if you look at the internal content of those EML files, you'll find that the different programs actually create the EML file in a slightly different way, one from the other. And so even though you say, okay, the EML file is my original, someone else could extract that same email from that PST. And even though they're both an accurate representation of the email, the internal data inside the EML file is different. So again, there can be some issues there with being able to say this is the true original. So when we define a collection and we decide that we need to do some processing, some of the things that we have to do is we have to be able to automatically redact the content of emails. There's just too many to manually read every email and manually redact it. And so we had to come up with some methods for automatically identifying and redacting sensitive information. And so we decided that we needed to provide an option to redact certain email addresses or domain names. We wanted an option to redact hyperlinks that were embedded in the email. And then we wanted to give you the ability to define your own patterns to detect information that might need to be redacted, such as social security numbers or credit card numbers or telephone numbers, or any type of information that can be detected with a pattern could be redacted automatically by the system. We also need to be able to, if we don't redact something, we still might want to disable it. So we don't want to display an email to the user that still has a link on the bottom of it that says, click here to unsubscribe me from my newsletter. That might not work too well if it was the governor and his subscription to a newsletter. And so if there's hyperlinks and email addresses in that email, even if you display them, you probably want them to be disabled so that no one can actually click on them and cause some kind of harm. So we also needed to be able to classify these emails automatically. And we wanted to be able to assign a variety of labels to them based on different attributes. And so we came up with some methods for doing that. We also wanted to be able to classify them as to, is it a record or a non-record? Or maybe have even more than 3 classes, but the 2 that most people will focus on is we need to be able to identify which of these emails are official records and which ones are not. And then also you need to be able to classify them as far as whether they're restricted or not. So the system needs to be able to analyze the content of an email and say, this email has content that needs to be restricted. And so you can make it a binary decision where restricted yes or restricted no, or you can have different levels of restriction. But in most cases, these actions work better if they're binary, where there's just 2 choices. But if you want more than 2, the system does allow that as well. The same thing with retention. Retention could be permanent or non-permanent, or it could be long-term, short-term, permanent. It can be whatever you'd like it to be. But we have to be able to automatically make these determinations. There's too many emails to do this manually. You just can't read every email and take the time to assign retention and access restrictions and record class and assign labels that represent attributes of it. I think the effort that Virginia went through demonstrates that you just can't do it manually. So we came up with 2 broad categories for automating the processing of emails. The first category we call content processing. And that's primarily looking for patterns of information in the content. So we're looking for email addresses, and we're looking for hyperlinks, and we're looking at the attachments, and we're looking at user-defined patterns. And depending on the email address, we might want to redact it, or we might want to, like if it's the governor's email address, we might want to identify it as being a record. Maybe we have a rule that says every email that the governor sends out is considered a record. And so we can do that through the email address content processing. So anytime we find an email that was sent by this address, it's a record. So we can automatically have rules that will assign those different actions on the other slide, labels and classes and retention and access restrictions, based on specific patterns and information that we can key on within the content or the subject of the email. The other category is a little less well defined. It's what we call context processing. And there we rely on some AI techniques to identify and assign attributes to the emails. One of the things we saw in EPAD was lexicon searches. And so we've incorporated lexicon searches and matches into the system. So you can define your own lexicons, words and phrases for legal matters, medical matters, legislative matters, whatever lexicon you want to define, you can define all the words and phrases that you think that if those words and phrases occur in the email, then that email likely is medical in nature, or it's legal in nature, or whatever. And so lexicon processing is an important way of identifying content and assigning attributes. Another area had to do with assigning the record classes and the access restrictions and the retention periods there. There we rely on you training the system to do that. And so we will select a random sample of emails and ask you to classify them. So you have to say it's a record or it's a non-record. And if it's not black and white, then maybe you don't tell the system what that one is. So you really want to say it's a record if it's clearly a record, and if it's clearly not a record, then you say it's not a record. And the in-between ones are where it's a little more difficult. But the idea is that if you go through and you train a couple of hundred emails, if you review them manually and identify the classification, then the system can use those emails to decide what all of the other emails, how they should be classified. And that's a very interesting concept, and it works pretty well. And so that's what we've incorporated in for assigning record classes automatically, and access restrictions automatically, and retention periods. So I mentioned earlier pattern content analysis using patterns. So a couple examples there would be medical information that we don't want to make public, personally identifiable information, confidential information, legal matters. For example, I saw some emails that all started with a phrase. They were from an attorney, and they all started with a phrase that said this email is subject to client-attorney privilege. You know, so if you can key on that phrase and automatically say this is a restricted email, then that's great, and the system can do that. So again, we're going to publish collections for public access, and so we have a website that we've created that allows the public to select the collection they want to search, and once they select it, then it brings up a robust search screen where they can do keyword searching, and they can have facets, and so they can zero in on emails that they're interested in. They can browse the results. So if they get 100 emails that match their search criteria, they can browse them one after the other. They can view them in plain text format or HTML format. They can view and download attachments. I didn't mention it, but we had to also overcome the challenge of providing an access copy for attachments, because you don't necessarily want to provide some of the public with access to the actual Word document or the actual spreadsheet or PowerPoint presentation. And so we have the ability in the system to transform attachments from their original format to an access format, for example, PDF. And then when someone's looking at the publicly published emails and they ask to see the attachment, they see the PDF representation of that attachment. They also see the redacted version of the email, and it is a true redaction where the original text is no longer there, so they can't look at the source of the HTML and see the text. It's not there. They can also, as I mentioned earlier, they can see the thread. If an email's in a thread, they can then browse the entire thread, or they can, if they see an email that looks interesting, they say, well, show me any other emails that are similar to this one, and they can get a list of those and browse those. And so the search program is also a very powerful tool for the public to try and find information that they're interested in from the thousands or millions of emails that might be out there online. Of course, the nice thing about that is it takes that burden off of your staff. So if they can search these collections themselves, then you don't have to have someone who does it for them. Then the final thing we do is we give you the ability to export a collection for preservation, and there's various search criteria that are available to do that. We'll create, so we'll actually let you select the ones you want to export and create a manifest, and then we'll export the emails. And we can either export the individual emails or the individual emails and the original file, whether it's a PST or an inbox or whatever, export it all, export the metadata that we've collected for it as well, and also any attachments that we extracted from the emails. So we'll be exporting a bundle of information for each email, basically. So obviously, to process the volume of emails, we've got to have a software solution that incorporates both human intelligence and artificial intelligence, because there's too many cases where a computer just can't make the right decision. Now, so how do you analyze an email if all it says is thanks, or see attached, or I'll call you tomorrow? You know, so there's always going to be exceptions where the computer is going to say, I can't tell you if this is a record or not, or I can't tell you if it should be redacted or not. And those will get kicked out as exceptions for a human to review. And so the artificial intelligence is going to handle the volume, the large volume of the emails. It's going to make the right decision, hopefully, on a large percentage of those emails, so that you don't have to review a million emails. You only have to review perhaps a few thousand emails. So that's where the human intelligence comes in. It's to make the decisions that the computer couldn't make. It's to review them, to resolve any conflicts, because the computer can actually come up with conflicting results. One processing method might say this email is a record, and another processing method might say no, it's not. So now you have the computer is disagreeing with itself. One processing task says it's a record, one says it isn't, and so it takes a human to resolve the issue. So the solution we've been working on is a very comprehensive email solution for processing large volume of emails, specifically for state governments. I don't know that we have a final name for it right now. We're calling it QEPS, or keeps, so it keeps your emails. We expect it to be released soon. We hope it will be ready by the time it goes to the meeting, but may not be totally ready. It's been under development for over 2 years. And it deals with all these challenges that we've talked about and many more that we haven't even mentioned. We had no idea the challenges we were going to have to overcome when we began this project. So as I mentioned earlier, we will be at the COSA meeting in St. Louis in September. We look forward to having an opportunity to speak with all of you there, answer any questions you might have about the system, and if we have time, we can show you a little bit of how it works. So I think at this point, we can turn it over for questions, and I'll be happy to answer any questions and elaborate on anything that you want more information about.
Okay, thank you, Steve. That was a very informative look at the mind-boggling steps that have to go into develop this. So this is a great time. If you've got a question for Steve, you can either type it in chat or raise your hand, and I will unmute you, and so that you can actually talk. So, but while we're waiting for people to do that, I've got a couple of questions, Steve. You mentioned that emails are searchable. Does this include the content of the attachments as well?
That's a good question, Lisa. Currently the system does not index the content of the attachments, but it is our plan to do so. And it probably won't make it into the initial release, but it will be in a release that comes shortly after that.
Great. You also mentioned that the system can create access copies of the attachments. And can those attachments be redacted if there's PII or something that shouldn't go out?
Yeah, that's a good question too. One of the challenges with redacting attachments is that there's such a wide variety of formats that they can be in. And so I think the method that we think is practical is that we will let you create the access copy, probably in PDF format would be your preferred access format. And then we have built into the system the ability for you to upload that PDF to your desktop and redact it using Acrobat, and then download it back to the system. And so what you would have would be a redacted access copy. The original would not be redacted.
Great. Okay. The public search website sounds really interesting. Will the public search program allow search results to be bookmarked? Can I come back and do it again or get that
In
same
other words,
search?
they've been working for a couple hours. They've got this search result on the screen and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
kinds of keywords they put in. And yes, they can bookmark that. And they can come back later, execute the bookmark, and it will bring the exact same search result back up on the screen that they had bookmarked. And we do keep a history of every search that is performed, so we know which emails are being searched and which ones are being looked at, and that can be useful information for the archive as far as deciding which collections to keep on to keep out there for public access. So if there's collections that are never looked at, they're taking up space, they're costing resources, you might remove them after some period of time, and the ones that people are interested in, you might want to keep for a while longer.
Great. AI, of course, has been a hot topic in the news. Does this email system use Chat GPT?
No, I wish it did though. I've been looking into Chat GPT and some of the other tools that have been in the news lately, and they're very interesting. And I think that in the future we will find a way to incorporate them into all types of applications in the archive field, perhaps in the email.
Okay.
One of the issues, of course, right now is there are fees associated with processing these AI requests. So if you were to ask it to classify 1 million emails, you're going to run up 1 million charges of maybe a fraction of a penny each, but it might add up to a lot of money. And so we'll have to see if it can become a cost-effective method or not. But it does have a lot of promise, I think, and we are looking into it.
Great. And then do you have any plans to incorporate natural language processing into the system?
Yes, that is something we plan to do. It didn't make it into the first release, but I think in the second release, you will find that we take advantage of natural language processing to extract context-based information out of the emails, such as being able to find a birth date. We can find dates, but I can't tell you there's a birth date right now. And so natural language processing would give us the ability to perhaps be more specific in terms of the information that we can extract and identify from the email. And so we do intend to incorporate that into the system. It just won't be in the initial release.
Great. I have one more question, but I'm hopefully going to have, I see we have one in chat. Do you have an estimate on the added cost for this feature when it rolls out? And that's from Kim.
I guess by feature, they mean the entire email system.
Yeah, I think so. Let's start with that. Kim, would you like to be unmuted and then you can talk some more? Let me get you up here to do that. Okay, Kim, you should be able to unmute if you've got
Yes,
microphone. There you go.
yes, can you hear me? Yes, I was just wondering how much this feature is going to cost, like initially and then on an annual basis,
Okay, that's a good
if you have
question.
that information yet.
Yeah. Well, I can give you the ballpark figure. We don't have a final price yet, but we do want to offer it as a hosted solution and as a solution that you could install on your own server. So you can take either approach. So as a hosted solution, there would be a monthly charge or an annual charge, and it would be based at least in part on the volume of emails that you're processing, because the system does require a lot of storage. There's a lot of emails, and it takes up a lot of disk space, and so the fee for hosting would vary depending on the volume of emails. But for us to host it for you, you're probably looking, assuming you're a state archive and you have millions of emails to process, you're probably looking at a fee of somewhere around $3,000 or $4,000 a month for us to host that system and provide everything you need to be able to process them and have the website available to the public and all of that. If you wanted to purchase a license, the price is going to be somewhere in the range of $75,000 to $100,000. And then there would be annual support fees that would entitle you to new releases and tech support and help with resolving whatever issues you have while you're trying to process all these emails. It's a very, I think it's going to be support intensive for a while until people learn how to process emails. So it's not going to be a free system. It's not going to be cheap, but what it does is makes it well worth the price that we're going to have to charge for it.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That was a great question. Do we have any other questions out there for Steve? So while I give you one more chance to think about them and either raise your hand or type in the chat, I've got one more, Stephen. You were talking about the hierarchy and the idea that we'll let the machine do as much as possible, but there's going to come a human interaction. And I'm just wondering, is when let's say you run a batch through and you end up with a lot more emails for the human to look at than you thought you were going to get. Can you go back and go, if you start seeing a pattern, can you go back in and add some more rules and then run the batch again so that you can narrow that down?
Yeah, you could add additional pattern matching rules if you wanted and rerun that. The system also learns from your feedback, though. I mentioned earlier that you would start out by training some number of emails, train the system. So if you start going through the emails where it couldn't make a decision, and you start making the decision, you say, this one's a record, this one's not a record. The system can then use those emails as additional information to try again. And so maybe your original sample didn't cover enough of the different cases that need to be covered. And so as you start to address those during your review, you can say, okay, now rerun it again and see if you can answer any more of them. So it is going to be an iterative process where the first time you run it, you might only have maybe 50% of them that have a decision assigned. But as you start to provide more information, then it can be run again and assign the result to a much bigger percentage.
Great. That's good to know, because I feel like we have to learn as well as the machine as we're doing all of this.
That's exactly right.
But great. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions, so thank you for the presentation. We'll just go forward here. And if you enjoyed today's presentation, just be aware that they're not listed here, but we do have other shop talks coming up the rest of the year. So watch for our other sponsors. They always provide great information. We do have an upcoming SERI webinar in October. Now, this happens to be Electronic Records Day that they're doing this particular webinar on metadata. Then for our member webinars, we've got 3 coming up. And the first is next week, and it's on First Amendment audits. And if you've not had one of those, they can be kind of scary. It's the public coming in and basically demanding access and sometimes wanting to videotape. So we definitely hope you join us for any of those. Plus, those of you who aren't going to be able to come with to St. Louis, we're going to do a recap of highlights at our September meeting, and then in October we're going to hear from two of our state archives, Mississippi and Alaska. So stay tuned for most of those. As always, there's lots of ways to reach out to COSA, and we hope you use as many that are useful for you. We have a Twitter handle, we have our website, we have a Facebook page. So reach out in all the various ways. And I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today. There may be a webinar feedback, a little thing for you, evaluation. And if there is, please take time to do that for us. It really does help us evaluate and plan for future ones. So with that, thank you all for joining us today. Steve, thank you for a very interesting presentation. We'll look forward to seeing you in September. And we hope we'll see many of you. And if not, we'll see you at the next COSA webinar. Thank you so much. Have a great day.